The Roman sun set over Britain, casting long, skeletal shadows across the crumbling stone villas of Banna Venta Berniae. In the year of our Lord 387, the world held its breath, suspended between the dying echoes of an empire and the savage whispers of a pagan frontier. A child was born amidst the scent of damp earth and flickering tallow candles, named Maewyn Succat by those who loved him. Outside the nursery walls, the winds of the Irish Sea howled like hungry wolves, carrying the salt of a destiny that would one day shatter ancient idols. The elders whispered of a boy marked by the stars, a soul destined to bridge the divide between the civilized cross and the wild oak. Though he played in the gardens of privilege, an invisible thread of providence was already tightening around his young and unsuspecting heart. His father, Calpurnius, served the fading Roman state, yet the boy felt a strange, haunting pull toward the jagged cliffs of the western coast. It was as if the very stones of Britain knew that this child belonged to the mist, destined for a much harder path. The heavens over the villa remained heavy with unspent rain, a celestial shroud reflecting the turbulent spirit of a world nearing its end. No one could have known that this infant, sleeping soundly in his cradle, carried the fire that would eventually set an entire Emerald Island ablaze. Prophecies from the deep woods spoke of a light bringer who would cross the waters, not with a sword of iron, but with a word of power. The Druids in the far west stirred in their sleep, feeling a cold shiver as the Roman boy's first cries echoed. The atmosphere in the household was thick with the incense of a flickering faith, yet young Patrick remained blissfully unaware of the looming storm. His childhood was a fragile peace, a golden hour of innocence before the brutal iron of the world would strike his soul. But the tides were shifting, and the pirates of the north were already sharpening their blades in the shadows of the Irish coves. A terrifying destiny was sailing toward the boy, hidden within the fog, waiting to drag him into the darkness that would become his greatest light. The Roman eagle was bleeding, its golden talons losing their grip on the jagged edges of the British Isles. As the legions marched south to defend a dying Rome, they left behind a vacuum of power, filled quickly by the cold, biting mist of chaos and uncertainty. Across the narrow, churning sea, Ireland remained a jagged emerald of mystery, ruled by the iron-willed Druids and fierce tribal kings. It was a land of ancient incantations, where the oak forests whispered secrets and the blood of sacrifices stained the altars of old, forgotten gods. Pirate ships with dark, weathered sails lurked in the hidden coves of the Irish coast, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. These raiders were shadows in the night, fueled by greed, retired and the savage joy of the hunt, looking toward the vulnerable, wealthy Roman villas. Young Patrick walked through the marbled halls of his father's estate, hearing only the distant, rhythmic thud of the ocean against the cliffs. He did not yet understand that the civilization surrounding him was a crumbling fortress, destined to be devoured by the encroaching, pagan wilderness. The air was thick with the scent of burning peat and the metallic tang of sharpening bronze blades across the water. Fear began to ripple through the coastal villages like a silent plague, as rumors of the men from the sea grew into terrifying tales of fire. In the Druidic groves, the high priests cast their sacred stones, sensing a shift in the spiritual winds that governed the northern world. They saw a flickering flame approaching, a foreign light that threatened to extinguish their ancient shadows and overturn the altars of their ancestors. The world was balanced on the edge of a sharpened sword, caught between the dying order of Rome and the rising ferocity of tribes. Every sunset felt like a final warning, a blood-red sky reflecting the violence that was about to erupt upon the peaceful British shores. Then, without a single horn blast of warning, the horizon was suddenly choked with the terrifying silhouettes of longships cutting through the gray fog. The hunt had begun, and the boy who knew nothing of suffering was about to become the most valuable prey of all. The dawn broke with a scream that tore through the morning mist of Banna Venta Berniae. Shadows lunged from the shoreline, their blades reflecting the cold gray light as Irish raiders swarmed the villa with the ferocity of a sudden, unstoppable winter storm. 16-year-old Patrick awoke not to the song of birds, but to the terrifying rhythm of splintering wood and clashing steel. The air thick with smoke and panic, he watched in horror as the refined world of his childhood was systematically dismantled by the hands of giants. A massive warrior with eyes like flint grabbed the boy, his iron grip bruising Patrick's young, soft skin. Around him, the treasures of Rome were trampled into the dirt, and the screams of his kin were drowned out by the savage victory cries of the sea wolves. Dragged toward the shore, Patrick's feet bled on the jagged stones, each step taking him further from the comfort of his father's house. He looked back one last time as the flames consumed the villa, the orange glow reflecting the sudden, brutal death of his innocence. The longship waited like a hungry beast on the churning surf, its wooden ribs groaning under the weight of human cargo. Thrown into the dark, damp hold, Patrick felt the violent lurch of the vessel as it turned its prow toward the treacherous northern horizons. Chained to strangers in the suffocating darkness, the boy heard only the rhythmic beat of oars against the relentless, salt-heavy waves. Every splash took him deeper into a world of pagan whispers, away from the Latin prayers and the safety of the crumbling Roman civilization. The ocean was a vast, indifferent tomb, swallowing the cries of the captive boys who lay shivering in the bilge water. Patrick clutched his chest, feeling a hollow ache where his pride used to be, now replaced by a raw, primal fear of the unknown green island. As the jagged cliffs of Ireland emerged through the fog, a chilling silence fell over the raiders and their broken prey. The boy who was once a nobleman's son was now merely a commodity, a slave destined for the desolate mountains and the lonely life of a shepherd. The emerald beauty of Ireland was a deceptive mask for the brutal cruelty Patrick now endured daily. Sold like cattle to a chieftain named Miliug, he was driven into the desolate, rain-swept slopes of Mount Slemish to guard huddling flocks of sheep against the ever-present hunger of wolves. Daylight offered no comfort, and the nights were long, freezing symphonies of isolation that threatened to shatter his mind. Clad in tattered rags that offered no protection from the biting winds, the former nobleman's son learned the agonizing language of true, bone-deep physical and spiritual starvation. Through the blinding snow and the relentless, driving rain, a strange transformation began to stir within his hollow chest. The boy who had ignored his faith in the comfort of Roman villas now found himself desperately screaming prayers into the indifferent, howling white mud of the Irish wilderness. "The love of God grew in me more and more," he would later whisper as he knelt on the frozen mud. In the terrifying silence of the mountains, he repeated hundreds of prayers, his voice a frail but defiant spark against the ancient pagan shadows that watched him from the woods. Hunger gnawed at his stomach like a feral beast, yet his spirit began to glow with a supernatural, unyielding intensity. He survived on meager scraps and the thin hope of a dreamer, becoming a ghost haunting the hills, his eyes reflecting a light that no winter could extinguish. The Druids looked upon the tattered shepherd boy with suspicion, sensing a resilient power radiating from his shivering frame. They did not know that the slave they mocked was becoming a vessel for a revolution, forged in the fires of suffering and tempered by the icy Irish streams. Every rustle in the dark forest felt like a predator's approach. Yet Patrick no longer trembled with the same unearthly fear. His isolation was becoming an altar, and the mountain a cathedral, as he prepared for a divine encounter that would soon change the course of his entire life. 6 long years of bondage had stripped away his name, his home, and his pride, leaving only a raw, sharpened soul. Then, in the dead of a restless night, a voice unlike any human sound shattered the silence, delivering a message that would ignite his desperate, impossible escape. The voice shattered the midnight stillness of the mountain, echoing not in Patrick's ears, but within his very marrow. "Your ship is ready," the celestial whisper commanded, jolting him from a state of starvation into a sudden, electric clarity that defied all human logic or earthly reason. Without a moment of hesitation, Patrick abandoned the flock and vanished into the impenetrable, swirling mists of the treacherous Irish interior. He was now a runaway slave, a dead man walking if the chieftain's hounds caught the scent of his desperate, rain-soaked trail through the ancient pagan woods. For 200 miles, he navigated by the stars and the frantic beating of his own heart, avoiding the flickering fires of tribal settlements. Every snapping twig sounded like a soldier's blade, and every shadow seemed to hide the vengeful eyes of the masters he had dared to defy. Adrenaline became his only sustenance as he crossed jagged ravines and swollen rivers that threatened to sweep his weakened body into oblivion. He was a ghost haunting the wilderness, driven by a divine compass toward a coastline he had only seen in the fragmented, feverish visions of his dreams. The salt air finally bit into his lungs as he reached the rugged edge of the western sea, gasping for breath amidst the dunes. There, through the morning fog, the silhouette of a weathered merchant ship appeared, its wooden hull groaning as it prepared to leave the pagan shores behind. Panic seized him when the captain initially refused his plea, seeing only a tattered, penniless fugitive with nothing to offer but desperation. Patrick turned away, his heart sinking into the sand. But a sudden shout from the deck called him back, as if an invisible hand had intervened. He scrambled aboard the vessel just as the anchors were hauled from the depths, the heavy chains rattling like the broken bonds of his past. As the sails caught the wind, the emerald hills of his captivity began to shrink, disappearing into the gray, unforgiving embrace of the Atlantic. The journey ahead was far from safe, filled with the constant threat of starvation on an empty ship and the terrifying unpredictability of the sea. Yet, as the Irish coast vanished, Patrick knew the boy who landed as a slave was dead, and a warrior was finally being born. The shores of Britain finally greeted Patrick with the familiar scent of home, a sight he had dreamed of during those 1,000 cold nights. His family wept, embracing the ghost they thought was lost forever to the cruel pagan altars of the Emerald Island across the sea. Safe within the stone walls of his father's estate, the luxury of soft linen and warm bread felt like a strange, forgotten dream. Yet, as the silence of the night settled over the Roman villa, a restless fire began to burn within his soul, far hotter than any hearth. Sleep became a battlefield, where the mists of Ireland returned to haunt his weary mind with terrifying, vivid clarity. He saw a man named Victoricus approaching him in a storm of light, carrying an endless mountain of letters that seemed to pulse with a hidden, ancient power. Patrick reached out, his fingers trembling as he grasped a single parchment labeled with the haunting words, "The Voice of the Irish." As he broke the seal, the very walls of his room seemed to dissolve into the jagged, wind-swept cliffs of the western sea. Suddenly, 1,000 voices erupted from the shadows of the wood of Folklat, a collective cry of a nation wandering in spiritual darkness. "We appeal to you, holy servant boy, to come and walk among us once again, they pleaded, their desperate echoes shattering his fragile peace. The adrenaline of that moment was more intense than his escape. A divine electricity that surged through his veins and demanded a total sacrifice. He awoke drenched in sweat, the cries of the pagans still ringing in his ears like a drumbeat calling a soldier to war. His family begged him to stay, terrified that he would return to the land that had once broken his body and stolen his youth. But Patrick knew the comfortable life of a nobleman was now a prison, and the rugged, dangerous wilds of Ireland were his only true home. The curiosity of his kin turned into a fearful awe as they watched the young man prepare for a journey no sane man would take. He was no longer a victim of the Irish. He was their chosen liberator, ready to face the Druids with a power they could never imagine. Before Patrick could face the ancient demons of Ireland, he had to conquer the shadows lurking within the depths of his own bleeding soul. He retreated into the austere silence of the monasteries, trading his noble garments for the rough, abrasive wool of a humble, searching monk. The adrenaline of the escape was replaced by the grueling discipline of the spirit, a relentless battle fought on knees over cold, stone floors. Under the watchful eye of St. Germanus, Patrick devoured the sacred scripts, his mind becoming a sharpened blade forged in the fires of divine wisdom. Every day was a desperate struggle against the haunting memories of his captivity and the seductive whispers of a comfortable, quiet life in Britain. He fasted until his ribs pressed against his skin, pushing his physical body to the very breaking point to find the hidden strength within. The monastery walls echoed with his fervent prayers as he sought to drown out the lingering, pagan chants that still echoed from his past. He knew that to face the Druids, he must first become a vessel of pure, unyielding light, leaving no room for fear or earthly desire. While others slept, Patrick stood vigil beneath the freezing stars, his eyes fixed on the distant, invisible horizon of the Emerald Island he once fled. The mystery of the Holy Trinity began to reveal itself in the simplest of things, even in the humble clover beneath his feet. Rumors of his intense devotion spread like wildfire through the cloisters, marking him as a man possessed by a singular, terrifyingly beautiful purpose. He was no longer the boy who herded sheep. He was becoming a shepherd of souls, ready to lead an entire nation through fire. The air grew heavy with a supernatural tension as the day of his ordination approached, a moment that would seal his fate as a divine warrior. He felt the weight of the voice of the Irish pressing against his heart, a relentless drumbeat demanding his immediate, total return. In the flickering candlelight of the cathedral, Patrick accepted the staff and the mitre, knowing he was signing his own death warrant among the pagan tribes. The transformation was complete, and the man of peace was now ready to unleash a spiritual storm upon the dark, jagged shores. The prow of the ship cut through the gray surf of Slane like a silver blade, marking Patrick's return to the land of his former shame. As his feet touched the sand, the very air seemed to crackle with an unseen electricity, signaling the arrival of a new, formidable power. A local chieftain, his eyes burning with the feral intensity of a wolf, watched the stranger from the high, jagged cliffs above the shoreline. This was Dichu, a warrior leader whose heart was as cold as the Irish winter, and he saw only an invader to be swiftly destroyed. The chieftain lunged forward, his iron sword raised high, ready to spill the blood of the man who dared to bring a foreign god. Adrenaline surged through the air as the blade whistled toward Patrick's neck, a split second away from ending the mission before it had truly begun. But suddenly, time itself seemed to freeze in a terrifying display of divine intervention that left the surrounding warriors gasping in utter disbelief. Dichu's arm became as rigid as a stone pillar, his muscles locked in a supernatural paralysis that no human strength could ever hope to break. The chieftain stood like a grotesque statue, his face contorted in a mask of primal fear as he looked into Patrick's calm, unyielding eyes. The silence that followed was heavier than a mountain, shattered only by the rhythmic, indifferent pounding of the Atlantic waves against the dark, jagged rocks. Patrick did not strike back. Instead, he spoke words that carried the weight of thunder and the gentleness of a summer breeze through the trees. The spiritual wall Dichu had built around his soul crumbled instantly, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace he had never before experienced. In a sudden burst of light, the paralysis vanished, and the once lethal chieftain fell to his knees in the damp, salt-stained sand of the beach. The warriors behind him lowered their spears, their predatory aggression transformed into a profound, trembling awe as they witnessed the defeat of their master. This was the first crack in the ancient pagan fortress of Ireland, a miracle that would echo through every valley and hidden mountain pass. The hunt was over. The conversion had begun, and the man who was once a slave had now become the undisputed master of miracles. The news of Dichu's miraculous surrender spread through the emerald valleys like a wildfire driven by a gale, igniting hope in the hearts of the oppressed. Thousands flocked to the shore, drawn by the magnetic authority of the man who carried no weapon but spoke with the voice of eternity. From the shadows of the ancient oak groves, the Druids watched the rising tide of converts with eyes full of venom and cold, calculating malice. They were the keepers of the old world, and they saw in Patrick a lethal threat to their power, their prestige, and their blood-stained altars. A shadowy network of spies and sorcerers was woven around the saint, tracking his every step through the bogs and the misty, high mountain passes. The adrenaline of constant pursuit haunted Patrick's journey, as every meal carried the threat of poison and every dark alleyway hid a sharpened bronze blade. Yet, for every enemy that emerged from the dark, a dozen disciples rose from the earth to stand as a living shield around their new shepherd. These were men and women who had seen the light in his eyes and were now ready to face the fiercest kings of Ireland. The High King Laoghaire sat upon his throne at Tara, his brow furrowed as his advisors whispered terrifying tales of the Christian sorcerer who defied nature. The air in the royal hall was thick with the scent of conspiracy, as the king weighed the cost of an all-out spiritual war. Patrick knew that a direct confrontation with the crown was inevitable, a collision of worlds that would either baptize the nation or drown him in blood. He did not retreat. Instead, he pushed deeper into the heart of the pagan stronghold, his spirit vibrating with a restless, divine energy. The curious eyes of the common folk followed his procession, caught between the terrifying legends of the Druids and the liberating promise of the saint's message. Every village became a battlefield of ideologies, where the silence was often broken by the clashing of old fears and new, radiant hopes. As the sacred festival of Beltane approached, the Druids prepared a trap designed to extinguish Patrick's light forever beneath the cold, unyielding moon of the spring equinox. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the soul of an entire island. And the tension was unbearable. The night of the great festival arrived, a time when every fire in Ireland was forbidden until the High King's flame atop Tara ignited the darkness. It was a law of blood and iron, designed to demonstrate the absolute dominance of the Druids over the souls of the living. Across the valley on the Hill of Slane, Patrick stood as a solitary silhouette against the starlit sky, holding a spark that would soon become a wildfire. The adrenaline coursing through his veins was a divine current, urging him to strike a blow against the ancient, suffocating shadows of paganism. With a single decisive movement, Patrick ignited the Paschal Fire, a brilliant beacon of defiance that pierced through the impenetrable gloom of the Irish night. The flames leaped toward the heavens, roaring with a supernatural intensity that could be seen for miles, mocking the king's unlit altar. King Laoghaire's court erupted in a frenzy of panic and murderous rage as they witnessed the forbidden light burning brightly on the distant horizon. The high priest, his face twisted in a mask of demonic fury, screamed that this fire must be extinguished now, or it would burn forever. The thunder of hooves shattered the silence as the king's elite chariot warriors roared toward Slane, their spears sharpened for the saint's immediate execution. Patrick did not flee. He stood his ground as the heavy scent of ozone and impending violence filled the cold, electric spring air. As the soldiers surrounded the blazing fire, the Druid priests attempted to unleash their dark enchantments, calling upon the storms to drown the holy flame in ice. But the wind refused to obey their commands, circling Patrick in a protective vortex that defied every known law of nature. Laoghairearty confronted the saint with the weight of an empire behind him, his sword trembling in a hand that had never before known a moment of hesitation. The air between the two men vibrated with a tension so thick it felt like a physical wall of unyielding, invisible iron. In that terrifying moment of confrontation, the king realized he was not facing a mere man, but an elemental force that no earthly weapon could ever conquer. The forbidden fire continued to roar, a radiant symbol of a new era that was already consuming the old, crumbling world of shadows. The defiance at Slane was only the beginning of a supernatural storm that began to tear through the very fabric of pagan Ireland. Patrick moved across the island like a living earthquake, his presence causing the ancient stone idols of Crom Cruach to tremble and eventually shatter into dust. In the dark heart of the forest, the Druids summoned a terrifying, unnatural fog that swallowed the sun, plunging the land into a freezing midday tomb. The adrenaline of the people turned to cold despair as the shadows moved with a predatory hunger, threatening to erase the saint's progress. Patrick did not waver. He raised his staff toward the leaden sky, and with a voice that echoed like a tectonic shift, he commanded the light. The oppressive darkness fractured instantly, torn apart by celestial rays that burned through the sorcery, leaving the Druids paralyzed by their own failed, blackened enchantments. Legends whisper of a terrifying infestation of serpents, creatures of ancient malice that crawled from the depths of the earth to reclaim the island. These were not mere snakes, but symbols of a primal darkness that had reigned over the Emerald Hills for centuries before the cross arrived. Standing upon the jagged heights of Croagh Patrick, the saint faced the slithering tide, his spirit vibrating with a power that shook the mountain's roots. With a single command that resonated through the valleys, he drove the venomous legion into the churning, salt-heavy depths of the Atlantic Ocean. The air on the mountaintop crackled with the remnants of the battle, a high-voltage tension that left the witnesses in a state of trembling awe. Every miracle was a thunderclap against the old world, a radiant demonstration that the era of blood sacrifices and shadow magic was finally coming to an end. Skeptics and kings alike watched in silence as the crippled walked and the blind saw the light for the first time in their lives. The mystery of the saint's power grew into a legend that outpaced his steps, making every village a scene of desperate hope and supernatural wonder. But as the miracles multiplied, a heavy shadow began to fall over Patrick's own heart, a premonition of the immense price he would have to pay. For every soul saved from the darkness, a part of his own mortal strength seemed to bleed away into the sacred Irish soil. The weight of a nation's salvation began to crush the fragile vessel of Patrick's mortal body, leaving him gasping for air in the midnight silence. Beneath the grand miracles lay a man haunted by the ghosts of his past, his skin sallow and his bones aching with a relentless, bone-deep fatigue. In the flickering candlelight of his stone cell, the saint faced a darkness that no druid could ever summon, the agonizing poison of self-doubt. He questioned if his words were truly divine or merely the echoes of a broken boy who had spent too many years screaming at the uncaring mountains. As his fame reached the shores of Britain, the green-eyed monster of envy began to stir within the hearts of his former colleagues and friends. Whispers of a secret sin from his youth were unearthed like ancient, rusted daggers, aimed directly at the heart of his sacred and hard-won reputation. The adrenaline of the mission was suddenly replaced by the cold, suffocating grip of a betrayal that threatened to strip him of his authority. Accusations of greed and hidden motives echoed through the stone cathedrals, casting a long, sinister shadow over the very churches he had bled to build. "I am a sinner, a most ignorant waif," he wrote with a trembling hand, his tears blurring the ink on the parchment of his confession. This was his private Gethsemane, a moment of profound vulnerability where the Apostle of Ireland felt like nothing more than a lost and lonely slave. The mystery of his resilience grew as he refused to fight back with worldly power, choosing instead to embrace the crushing weight of his own thorns. His enemies mistook his silence for weakness, unaware that his true strength was being forged in the white-hot fire of this absolute, painful humility. Every gray hair on his head told a story of a battle fought in the unseen realms, where the stakes were far higher than mere earthly kingdoms. The mystery of his soul remained locked away, a treasured chest of scars that he carried as a silent offering to the God he served. As the storm of scandal raged around him, Patrick prepared for his final and most difficult journey, sensing that his time among the living was fading. The high tempo of his life was slowing to a rhythmic, solemn beat, signaling a transition that would soon shock the entire Emerald Island. The air in Saul grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading incense as the saint's final hour approached the horizon. His breathing was a ragged rhythm, echoing through the small wooden church where he had first planted the seeds of a revolution that changed a nation. Adrenaline flickered one last time in his tired eyes as a sudden, supernatural chill swept through the room, signaling a final spiritual confrontation. Even at the edge of the grave, the ancient shadows of the island seemed to gather, sensing the departure of their most formidable and hated adversary. Patrick beckoned his closest disciples, his voice a dry whisper that carried the authority of 1,000 storms and 1,000,000 prayers. He did not speak of his pain, but of the fire he had lit, demanding they keep the flame burning long after his bones turned to dust. Outside, the sky turned a bruised purple, and the winds began to howl with a mournful, rhythmic intensity that shook the very foundations. It was as if Ireland itself was weeping for its father, the land groaning in a mysterious symphony of grief that reached from the coast to the mountains. The mystery of his life was reaching its climax, and the tension in the room was a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. He reached for his staff, his fingers trembling with the last of his earthly strength, as he blessed the four corners of the Emerald Island. A sudden, blinding light filled the humble stone cell, an electric presence that caused the monks to fall to their knees in trembling awe. In this moment, the boundary between the mortal world and the divine realm became a thin, shimmering veil, vibrating with a celestial and terrifying energy. Every word he uttered was a legacy carved into the hearts of those who listened, a spiritual map for a country still finding its way. The adrenaline of the moment was not of fear, but of a triumphant transition. A warrior finally laying down his sword at the feet of his king. As the first light of dawn touched the hills of Saul, a profound and eerie silence fell over the gathered crowd, heavier than any storm. The saint's journey was nearing its end, but the final miracle was already beginning to stir beneath the sacred soil of the land he loved. The moment of transition arrived, not with a whimper, but with a sudden, violent surge of spiritual electricity that seemed to ignite the very atmosphere. Patrick's heart gave its final rhythmic thud, and at that exact second, a thunderclap without clouds roared across the entire length of Ireland. An impossible golden light erupted from his frail body, shattering the dim shadows of the stone cell with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The monks recoiled in terror and awe as the air began to hum with a high-voltage energy, vibrating like the string of a celestial bow. The adrenaline of the witnesses reached a fever pitch as they felt the ground beneath Saul tremble, as if the island itself was struggling to hold on to its protector. It was a chaotic, beautiful collision of realms. A soul of iron finally tearing through the fragile silk of the mortal world. Legends say that for 12 days after his passing, the sun refused to set, casting a relentless, supernatural glow over the weeping emerald hills. The darkness was banished by a divine command, as if the heavens were celebrating the return of a warrior who had conquered the deepest pagan night. Invisible choirs seemed to echo in the wind, their voices a melodic storm that drowned out the frantic cries of the grieving, bewildered crowds. The mystery of the saint's departure became a living, breathing event, an energetic pulse that could be felt in the marrow of every living soul nearby. Angels and ancient spirits seemed to clash in the shimmering air above his resting place, a final, invisible battle for the soul of the land. The energy was so thick that the horses of the visiting chieftains reared in panic, sensing the presence of a power beyond human comprehension. Every witness stood paralyzed in a loop of wonder and fear, caught in a temporal distortion where seconds felt like centuries of divine revelation. Patrick was no longer a man of flesh. He had become a pillar of pure, unyielding light, rising through the layers of the shifting cosmic sky. As the initial shock subsided, a profound, electric peace began to settle over the hills, though the air remained charged with a lingering, holy static. The transition was complete. The soldier had ascended, but the mystery of what he left behind was only beginning to manifest in the sacred earth. The body of the saint was barely cold when a new, terrifying energy began to radiate from the sacred soil of Downpatrick. It was not a silence of the grave, but a rhythmic, pulsing vibration that suggested the warrior saint was still watching over the jagged, emerald cliffs of his adopted home. Adrenaline surged through the veins of grave robbers and invaders who dared to approach his resting place with ill intentions in their dark hearts. They were met not by guards of flesh, but by a supernatural dread that turned their limbs to lead and their sight into a blinding white fog. Centuries passed like shadows, yet the mystery of the saint's presence grew stronger, becoming an invisible fortress that shielded Ireland from total spiritual annihilation. Every stone near his cathedral seemed to hum with a residue of that ancient, divine fire that once defied the most powerful Druid kings. In times of war and desperate famine, the people whispered that they saw a solitary figure walking the mist-covered mountains, staff in hand, still driving away the darkness. This phantom protector became a symbol of unyielding defiance, an energetic ghost that refused to let the flame of faith be extinguished. The shamrock he once held became a seal of power, a simple green leaf that carried the weight of 1,000 miracles and a nation's soul. To this day, the air around his granite marker in Down Cathedral remains thick with an electric, holy tension that defies any logical, scientific explanation. The mystery remains. Did Patrick ever truly leave? Or is he waiting in the roots of the Irish oaks for the day the shadows return? The adrenaline of his life still flows through the blood of millions, a restless, vibrant heritage that continues to challenge the cold, indifferent silence of the modern world. Can you feel the echo of his voice in the howling Atlantic winds? Or the spark of his fire in the eyes of the brave? His story is not a closed book, but a living, breathing warning to any darkness that dares to cross the shores he claimed with his own blood. The 15-chapter journey ends here, but the saints' march through history continues, a relentless, high-tempo odyssey that will never truly find a final rest. The light he ignited on the Hill of Slane still burns, a cosmic beacon for every soul lost in the cold, unforgiving mists of time. As the final echoes of the saint's voice faded into the Irish mists, he left behind a weapon more powerful than any iron sword. This was his breastplate, a rhythmic and roaring incantation of divine protection designed to shield the soul from the unseen arrows of the dark, ancient forest. "I arise today," the prayer began, a sonic surge of adrenaline that called upon the very strength of the heavens and the brilliance of the sun. It was not a plea of weakness, but a high-voltage declaration of power, binding the soul to the elemental forces of the wind and the white-hot fire. Through the rhythmic verses, Patrick summoned the stability of the earth and the fathomless depth of the sea to stand as his immortal guard. The mystery of the Holy Trinity was woven into these words like a golden thread, creating a spiritual armor that no pagan curse could ever hope to penetrate. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me. The chant vibrated, creating a circular fortress of light around the trembling hearts of his followers. Every line was a tactical strike against fear, a cosmic shield that turned the spears of enemies into harmless shadows and the poison of envy into dust. The adrenaline of this prayer still pulses through the cathedrals and the lonely, rain-swept chapels of the modern world, offering a sanctuary for the weary. It is a mystery of sound and faith, a frequency that aligns the human spirit with the thundering, majestic heartbeat of the Creator's own unyielding and eternal power. As you listen to these ancient words, can you feel the invisible nairn of the saint's resolve wrapping around your own fragile and searching soul? This is the final secret of Patrick's success, not just his miracles, but the unwavering, rhythmic armor he wore against the darkness of a crumbling and violent age. The prayer serves as a bridge, connecting the 5th century warrior to the modern seeker, a high-tempo spiritual lifeline that refuses to be broken by time. It is a call to action, an invitation to rise today with the strength of the stars and the uncrushable might of an ancient, radiant, and holy conviction. Now, the story of St. Patrick is truly sealed, not in a tomb, but in the living breath of this eternal and powerful shield of words. May this this breastplate, be your own guard as you walk through the mists of your journey, forever protected by the fire of the Emerald Saint.